Will you pray with me? And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Have you called anyone this morning? Or maybe you've received a call this morning, or maybe over the weekend. Maybe it was a call that you made to check on someone, to see how they are doing, just asking about them, maybe to catch up. Or perhaps a call to coordinate worship, or a call to order or buy something. Anybody ever do that? Especially the last few months. A call to ask someone to help with a particular ministry or a task of the church, possibly. We used to get lots and lots of phone calls in our lives. Now maybe some of those have moved to texts or emails or FaceTime. There's all sorts of ways to communicate now. But there's lots of phone calls probably in our life that we still remember. Maybe it was a call that wasn't such good news. Or maybe it was a call that we were accepted into a new school or got a new job. I have a call that sticks with me. I was 25 at the time, and I got this call, and the person on the other line said, "Would you like to come to Oklahoma for a job interview?" There was no context behind it, and I hadn't sent out any job requests. I hadn't sent in my, own job requests for people to hire me. So I was trying to figure out why I would go to Oklahoma for a job interview that I hadn't applied for. At the time, I was a kindergarten teacher, and I was also volunteering in our region to help with youth ministry and church camps, but I certainly hadn't inquired on any job positions in Oklahoma. So I kind of said, well, what kind of job? They said, well, we'd like to fly you down here and have you interview to be our youth minister at First Christian Church, Ponca City, Oklahoma. And I was like, well, how did you get my name? Like I said, I hadn't made any inquiries. And they said, person on the phone said, well, I'm not really sure, but I was told to call you and set up a flight so we could fly you down and interview you for 4 days, for a 4-day interview. So I said, well, let me hang up and think about it and ponder it and pray, maybe talk to some people. So I hung up, and it wasn't 5 minutes later that I got another phone call that said, oh, by the way, I gave your name to First Christian Church, Ponca City to be their youth minister. Well, this was another youth pastor in the Denver area who I had been working with as a youth sponsor. And so when he got the call, if he knew of anybody who could be a youth minister in Oklahoma, he thought of me and gave me their name. But they got to me before he did. But he got the confusion clarified there, and we were able to go on. So I went ahead, called them back and said, yeah, I'd come see, try it out. I had never thought about doing that, but I thought, okay, I'll just check it out. Flew to Oklahoma, was there, like I said, for several days. They took me everywhere in Oklahoma and around Ponca City and showed me all the sites. They even showed me their mountain if I came. It was a little hill, but they said if I ever missed the Rocky Mountains, I'd have this little hill that I could go to. I was interviewed by probably 15 different groups in the church over those 4 days. And then I got on the plane to go home, and I just started crying and crying. Before I'd gotten on the plane, I had said to the senior pastor, when do I need to tell you if I'm going to take this job, if I'm going to take this call and come and move to Oklahoma from Colorado? And he said, well, we could give you 4 weeks. And I said, that's great, because I want to, make pros and cons lists and talk to all my friends and talk to my mentors. So I did get on the plane, and I just started to sob. And the flight attendant came up to me and said, is everything okay? Can I be of any service? How can I help you? And I was just sobbing, and all she could hear was, I'm going to move to Oklahoma. No offense to anyone in Oklahoma. I loved my 11 years in Oklahoma. It was amazing and beautiful, and I have lifelong friends now from Oklahoma. But at the time, I'd only lived in Colorado and just didn't know what all that was going to mean, changing from kindergarten teacher to youth pastor, to live in a whole new state where I really probably didn't know even a handful of people. So I was crying and crying. But when I did get home, I still was going to take my 4 full weeks, even though I knew on that plane I was going to Ponca City, Oklahoma. So about 2 weeks in, they hadn't heard from me. So the pastor in Ponca called and said, "Have you made a decision yet?" And I said, "No, not yet. I still have 2 more weeks." And so he kept calling until the very last day. And although I knew on that plane when I was sobbing into the tissues that the flight attendant gave me so generously, I called on the very last day at the very last minute and said, yes, I am coming. And I ended up being there as one of their associates for 11 years in many different roles. So that's a call that I will never forget. And I'm sure some of us have some of those same phone calls that we have never forgotten. Moses, the one in our story, had a call, not via phone or text or email, but via burning bush. A call I'm not sure he wanted to take at the time. It was from a bush that was burning but was not being consumed. It was a bush that was considered on holy ground. And it was a call so holy that sandals had to be removed and faces were hidden. Moses' call was also a surprise to him. It was also very unexpected. As Rick Morley describes it, when Moses saw a bush that was burning but not being consumed, his curiosity was piqued. Moses needed to know more. He needed to take a closer look. And so Moses took the time to go and see this wondrous sight. When God saw that Moses turned aside to see, God called him out from the bush. This is perhaps a small point, but when God set a bush ablaze, God didn't choose a bush right in front of Moses, right in his path. God didn't choose the bush that Moses was about to stumble over. It was within sight, but at enough distance that Moses would have to go out of his way to explore it. And he did. And it was this curiosity that brought Moses to a wondrously burning bush, which turned out to be so much more. It parallels, in a wonderful way, God's hearing Israel's cries. They were in slavery. They were in bondage. They were suffering. Verse 7 in today's text that Ever read describes God observing the misery of the Israelites. But in a sense, God's merciful curiosity drew God to the suffering people, the people God would work through Moses, the shepherd, to free. The Exodus and the call of Moses are thick lessons with strata upon strata of meaning to sift through. But in a simple sense, the 3rd chapter of Exodus bids us, the people of faith, to be curious of the world around us. This ministry and work isn't always right in front of us in obvious ways. Sometimes we need to follow our instincts off the path a little bit to get a closer look. And sometimes we may just hear the voice of God when we do. We are all called. We are all called often enough to look more closely, listen more intently, and search out the nooks and crannies of the world around us, and hear the cry of people we might not normally hear. As we seek out those nooks and crannies where we should work and respond, we recognize our own calls, and that our own calls do not necessarily come in flashy ways or in burning bushes. And they certainly are not all the same. As J. Oswald Sanders wrote, God's call does not come by any stereotyped method. There are various ways to receive and then live out a call. And a call from God, as based on the theology of the priesthood of all believers, is more than just an ordained call to church-related ministries. It is much bigger. It is much broader. In a conversation with a 25-year-old, he said, I have never had a call, really, to do anything. I haven't heard a voice or seen a bush catch on fire. But as his family began relating their own call stories to him, he began to get a new understanding. First, from his grandfather, who ran a plant here in Denver in the 50s and the 60s, 70s. And often others would fire his employees for reasons of they didn't know how to read, or they didn't like their cultural practices, or they just thought their economic situation wasn't helpful. And it was his ministry to go back and rehire them and find that work and career that they could be a part of. And then he heard from his mom, who said when she received her stimulus checks, she put them all together and took a mission trip to help build a health clinic in an underserved neighborhood. And then she heard his dad, talk about why he's in the field of elder care. And he runs a senior community. And there he says, even at the end, I always make sure someone is there to hold someone's hand at the end of life. As he heard their stories, he realized, well, my own call to be a firefighter may be my call from God. I don't know if I look extra tired, but I have been at junior camp all week at La Forêt. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to La Forêt down in the Black Forest. I got back from camp yesterday after being with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders as we talked about and explored creation. We focused on how we can care for creation, water, land, animals, sky, and humanity. Near the end of the week, a camper told me that when they got home, she was going to talk to her town council in her little town about water conservation because she felt there was waste in her town. She felt called to do something about it. She wanted to act on it. What do we feel called to do? What do we feel called to act upon for the care of others and for creation and for justice? At the end of camp, we had a little commissioning, and we asked all the campers to come up with ways that they would commit and work to care for all of God's creation. One child said they were going to work with the nature conserve in their valley. One said they would make sure their great grandma had a regular visit since they had been so lonely in the last year and a half. One said they were going back to their church to ask if they could start using the regular dishes that were stored in the cabinet instead of the styrofoam and paper. And they even committed to helping do the dishes at their church. One said that they were going to organize a youth group in their town because all the churches met separately, but they never came together because they each worshiped a little bit differently. And she was going to try to pull them all together to do youth activities as one. Simple yet profound ways to answer God's call. Profound yet very diverse ways to answer God's call. Diverse, yet calls coming out of curiosity and willingness to reach out beyond self and live and work for justice for all of creation, all of the world. So I would like to invite you. I would like to invite you to take a moment and think about where you are becoming aware of a need. Maybe a need in your community or the church, or just where you live and have your work, possibly. As you become aware of the need or even suffering, or if you become aware of an injustice in your community, in your world, how do you feel called to move from curiosity to action, to move from norm to new, to move from complacency to taking a risk? Moses took a risk when he went back to free the Israelites. We have to take a risk when we receive and act on a call. When a junior camper goes back and tells all the adults in her church that she's going to change the way they do dishes, taking a risk. But we're all called to take a risk and to respond. So where are you called? Where are we called? So I invite us to answer those calls. Amen.